All right. Hello, everyone.
Hello, hello, hello. How are y'all?
Good evening.
How's it? We're here. It is Saturday night. It is Starfleet Tactical. I don't know. What number are we on? Anyone?
20.
Number 20.
Wow.
Oh, that's a nice round number. Well, welcome to Starfleet Tactical number 20. I'm Alec Peters. I'm here with my dogs. There's Itty Bitty. Here's Pee-wee in his hoodie. You can see his little hoodie. Still in temporary housing. We close on Tuesday, so we're hoping Thursday we move into our new place. We're out there again today. So yeah, it's always pet night here. Unfortunately, it's like a two-bedroom apartment. I'm in the living room, which is basically where we have all the pets. 4 dogs and a bunny. So it is, and they all seem to love being in this chair with me. Anyway, how you doing?
I know exactly what that's
Chris
like.
only has one pet, Slacker.
Yeah, well, so back when I was married, my ex-wife and I did feline rescue, and we peaked at 17.
Oh my God!
Of which I think 4 or 5 were officially ours. Another 3 or 4 were actually ours, and the others were fosters.
Oh wow! Okay. Wow.
What did your house smell like?
So it smelled perfectly fine because we had a metric shit ton of litter boxes. I mean, we literally had like 10 litter boxes, and we changed them each and every day.
Oh God!
Only imagine like just dumping litter in the garage.
No, we spent a lot of time, and we had clumping litter. So, I mean, it wasn't like we had to cycle through 10 bags of litter each day.
Okay.
But we were like fastidious about doing the litter box for exactly that reason.
Yeah.
And luckily, nobody was having a problem with being around a bunch of other cats. So we didn't have a situation where cats were, doing their business where they shouldn't. So from that standpoint, it actually worked out.
Dude, what are you complaining about? We had 13 Belgian Malinois puppies in our living room.
My son would love that.
It was insane. They were 10 days old when we got them. I think we fostered them for about somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks. I forgot how long it was. And they went from, barely, their eyes were just opening to full on, I guess they were about 15 pounds, the big ones when we finally let them go. And full on fur missiles. Belgian Malinois are very active dogs.
Huh.
They're like German Shepherds. They're actually more German Shepherd than German Shepherds. They're your EOD dogs. They're your police dogs, military dogs. They're like the number one breed for all those kind of work. But they're so high energy. They need a job. So like the rescue had experience with them, and so they wouldn't let anyone adopt them unless they had already been an owner of a Belgian and knew about it. Because you have to train them, you have to keep them active, you have to give them stuff to do, But it is amazing. There's a YouTube video where a Belgian literally jumps off a tree and does a flip in the air and lands. And there's another one where this Belgian jumps about halfway up a house and climbs to the roof. It's just shit you would not believe. And these dogs can do it. They're absolutely amazing, and they're just fluffy and fun and absolutely sweet. So, our good friend Paul Osborne, who works for Homeland Security, he had them, so they adopted Artemis. So yeah. Anyway,
my family growing up, I lived on an acreage because my dad is the son of a farmer, and while he was never really into the I want to grow grain until the earth sort of stuff. He had a big garden. We had a huge garden, and he's still into gardening in his 80s. But he was really into having livestock around it and stuff. So we had turkeys, and we had ducks and geese and chickens and sheep, etc. And his preferred dog was a border collie. And border collies are really smart, and they're natural herders. And so you'd watch the border collie. The border collie would move the sheep from one field through the gate into the other field, let them sit there for 20 minutes, and then move them back. The sheep weren't moving more than 50 feet, but the dog would just move them back and forth all day long. I watched that dog, the series of dogs, herd sheep, ducks, chickens, children. It was fantastic.
I think I'm gonna. Well, I'm gonna turn it off over right now because it looks like one of my dogs is pacing. I think she needs to go out. So why don't we turn it over to Pat Doyle? Because Pat, you're gonna talk about Balance of Terror tonight, aren't you? Not the Trump administration. You're going to talk about this Star Trek episode.
That's right. That's right. No reality here at all. This will be a reality-free zone for an hour.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Sounds good. So let me try to share my screen here.
Go ahead, Mama. Mama, go. Hey, Lisa, can you take me off for...
All right. So this is me sharing my screen. Interesting. Okay. So, yeah, we'll share that one. Okay, cool. All right. So I hope everybody's doing well tonight. Let me just get everything arranged and closed and so that I can properly run this. Okay, here we go. So we are going to talk about Balance of Terror a little bit today. I'm not just going to simply regurgitate the episode. I'll try to talk about a few other things around the show and maybe some things we didn't see on screen. Talk a little bit about, and some of the stuff today is going to be my interpretation. So it's just that. Take it, leave it, like it, don't like it. That's fine. And then there'll be spots for Chris and perhaps some discussion and stuff like that in here tonight. So, anyways, with all that being said, so first let's start with a couple. See if there is delay here. All right, move that. Okay. So, first thing about Balance of Terror, and this is just some real world stuff, or just a little bit of it. Balance of Terror was the 14th episode of Star Trek. So we have some 750 hours of Star Trek now, increasing weekly. So this was the 14th episode. So not everything had been solidified. Not everything was in stone yet. And obviously they were still working some things out. So it's a very early, most important thing is, I think it was simply a very early episode of the show. And I believe that this is, and I'm sure lots of other people can go back and check, but I believe this was probably the first real, let's call it serious space battle done on television or cinema, I think. I remember Forbidden Planet and stuff like that. I don't remember a space battle in that. I just remember a monster going around stomping on people and stuff. So I believe this was probably the first, serious space battle, and the whole episode was pretty much dedicated to the battle. So it was fun. So frankly, I think it holds up pretty well after 50 years after more than 50 years. And it was 1966, I believe, is when, I think it was December. I had it written down the other day, but I seem to have lost my note. But anyway, so the point is, long time ago, over 50 years ago. Now, the episode itself, it's based on the movie, and I believe, and there was a novel that the movie was based off of called The Enemy Below. And it was Robert Mitchum as a U.S. destroyer captain fighting a German submarine captain. So It doesn't take a genius to figure out who was who in this scenario. Kirk was obviously playing the sort of the destroyer captain, and the Romulan was modeled after the Romulan captain. So now, one of the little technical issues, or I guess weapon issues with the show, is they hadn't really invented the photon torpedo yet, and they really hadn't even defined what a phaser was. So during the show, we see phasers firing in proximity blast. So that ended up being the same special effect. If you watch the old episode, it's very clearly that the special effect they used for the phasers was later used as a photon torpedo. Now, there are several other people who have done some actually really good, if you get on YouTube, you can find some battle analysis of this episode and the battle. And in their take of it, they take a more literal approach to the episode, in that what they were doing was firing pulse phasers, and that the proximity blasts were, probably the best way I could explain it, large phaser bubbles that, went out and, took up fired the phasers over a larger area. And that's how they were able to score their hits, those little long range pinprick hits they got with the phasers. So that was some of their interpretations of it. And there was one guy, and I'd have to go back and maybe I'll look it up later on and give it to you by the end of the episode. There was one guy that did a pretty fun, recap of the battle, where you actually kind of see cinematically where they were in proximity to each other and stuff like that. So I'd highly recommend that one also. I'm not. Yes.
So can I jump in here
Sure.
for just a second? That interpretation that they talked about is actually kind of interesting, because it sort of implies the type of, the original series is really an outlier. Well, the original series and the animated series are outliers from the rest of the Star Trek corpus. And that phaser effect sounds a lot like the phaser effect that you get from the movies, where there's lots of little shots taking place, right?
Right. Or a Nemesis, where they use the phasers to find the cloaked ship.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it sort of makes me wonder if how much of their influence is of their interpretation is based upon the fact that they saw the movies.
Yeah, that could very well be. So you could certainly take the show literally, that they were, that those were in fact phaser blasts set to a pulse kind of thing. And of course, this would be a great nerd debate over some beers and stuff like that, right? So this would be a fun debate to have.
Yeah, you need some math.
Yeah, and so I tend to stick with, because we never saw, because that special effect became the photon torpedo, and then we never saw them fire their phasers in pulse blast at any other time, that those were probably photon torpedoes, and that the Hollywood depiction of the historical event of this battle, Hollywood just got it wrong with a couple little technical errors. So it's my personal, the way I twist this a little bit is that those long range proximity phaser blasts were actually photon torpedo strikes. And of course, my influence from that is the game Starfleet Battles, where photon torpedoes could be set to proximity blasts. Then you could fire them at long range. They didn't do as much damage, but they had a much higher chance of hitting and actually scoring some damage at long range. So of course, that's my bias on the whole thing. And, but that's kind of how I think of it. Now, there are other times in the episode where the Enterprise gets really close to the Romulan ship, and they go ahead and they fire some, and they fire their phasers. And in my mind, those are the close range fire. Those are the close range actual phaser shots. And ironically, whenever Kirk calls out, orders that the phasers be fired in those close range times, we never actually see the phasers. We never actually see the special effect of them firing. We just hear the swooshing sound inside the Enterprise. as they fire. So that's one of my particular little interpretations with it. Nobody has to agree or disagree or something, but that's just my particular bias on it. So a couple other things. The Romulans really probably had warp capability, right? Because, well, in the show Enterprise, we did see the Romulans actually had warp capable vessels, right? You can't have a, at least in this particular universe, you can't have a competitive Star Nation without having some form of warp capability. Now, I would consider it possible that maybe the Enterprise hadn't detected, their sensors were set up to detect, an antimatter reactor and stuff like that. And perhaps the Romulans used a slightly different way of powering their ships. And so clearly they had to have had some form of warp capability anyways. Or maybe it was just not that great, not that efficient. Maybe the Enterprise's sensors weren't that good, or maybe the cloaking device obscured the Enterprise's ability to detect it. So either way, they were just trying to give mostly they were just trying to convey that the Romulan ship was much slower, and that gave Kirk a tactical advantage in speed. So, but the other thing is the width of the Romulan neutral zone. Now, in the chart I'll put up next, I'll just run this over here so we can take a quick peek at it. So this is from the Star Charts book that came out published in 2002. And each square that we see on here, let's see, there we go. So each of these squares that we see in this grid, that's 2 light years according to the Star Charts book. That means that the Romulan neutral zone is about 2 light years wide. Of course, we see Nimbus here, and it's important to get the lay of the land here. So we're going to kind of go over this the map just a little bit. Of course, this is the Romulan territory. The blue area over here is the Federation. Romulus and Remus are over here. And more importantly, we talk about they mention several different outposts, the outposts that guard the neutral zone along here. So they're labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way around the neutral zone. And as the show progresses, they have lost the Federation. They've lost contact with Outpost 2. And so the Enterprise, which is patrolling the border, is going to investigate. And then we lose contact with Outpost 3. We see a little bit of the battle with Outpost 4. But Commander Hansen, who is the commander of Outpost 4 right here, when he's talking to Kirk, mentions that Outpost 8 has been destroyed. So if you do have the Star Charts book, this is where I believe when they did this, they didn't really watch the episode with in any detail, because this little red dotted line that you see here that moves up along supposedly indicates the route of the Romulan ship during the battle. However, the route came along. This part's probably right. He hits Outpost 2. So somewhere in there, he did some maneuvering, hit Outpost 3, hit Outpost 2, hit Outpost 3. We know that he hit Outpost 4. But when he hit before he destroyed Outpost 4, Commander Hansen said Outpost 8 has also been destroyed. So that brings up another point. There had to be another Romulan out there probably that took out Outpost 8. Unless our Romulan commander flew up here, blew up Outpost 8, then flew, another 20 light years down here to Outpost 2. Seems unlikely to me. So anyways, that's just some big picture stuff.
Unless they were numbered out of order.
Well, actually, no, because that is also unlikely. Because here, this is the map we actually see in the episode. And you'll note that they are laid out in exactly the same way in the Star Charts book. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But we only see 7 up here though I think we can safely infer that Outpost 8 is a little bit high and to the right of 7. Certainly not a guarantee. They could have a mislabeled thing, and maybe Outpost 8 is down here at the bottom, but the bottom line is we don't know. So again, this would be another good nerd debate over some beers. However, now let me just go back real quick. One interesting little note I'd like to point out that in the Franz Joseph, I don't know if I'm coming up in the screen, but the Franz Joseph Starfleet Technical Manual, or in there, if you read their treaty between the Federation and the Romulan Empire, they set up a neutral zone that was 750 parsecs wide. So 750 parsecs a parsec is 3.2 light years. So that comes out, if you do the math, that comes out to 2,400 light years wide. So that obviously, the Franz Joseph interpretation of the Federation is way larger than sort of what Trek evolved into. So I think we can safely discount the 750 parsec. Just thought that was a amusing historical note. So, okay, so we got the map there. So we've got the general idea. Somewhere along the way, that Romulan traveled across the neutral zone, took out Outpost 2, took out Outpost 3, and then we'll go into a little bit of detail about Outpost 4, as a matter of fact. I'll go into some detail on that. I think it raises some interesting questions and some stuff. So as the Enterprise, as the show opens, when Spock is giving his briefing to the crew, after the wedding gets canceled and they run up to the bridge, Spock is given his briefing, and you see the blinking dot as he's given the briefing of the Enterprise as it's traveling towards Outposts 2, 3, and 4. So we'll talk a little bit about the matchup. We'll talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of each of the ships and their commanders. This one brings up the question, is Spock a spy? Because again, we're only in episode 14 and they introduce an enemy that looks an awful lot like Vulcans. And so if you were seeing this for the first time, Spock might very well be a spy. So, hell, I believe that some of the network people didn't like him anyway. So maybe this was a way of getting rid of him. So maybe there might have been a little more tension about it. Who knows? But the other thing to think about, and I kind of wonder about this, and Chris, I don't know if you got any ideas, but what were the Romulans' goal with this operation? I've come up with a couple ideas. Was this just a scouting mission? Were there other ships involved? I think we can make a pretty decent case that there was at least one other ship involved that took out Outpost 8 at about the same time. Or because at one point in the show, the Romulan commander, he laments that he says, when we have proof of the Earthman's weakness, you know what's going to happen when he's talking to the Centurion. And, to the Centurion's like, yeah, what of it? What we do, if they're weak and we're strong, then we're going to war. And that's just how it is. And of course, we have a Romulan commander who's just a little bit tired of this sort of stuff. So,
which makes you wonder who they were fighting.
Correct. Yeah. It also opens up that very question. Like probably on the Romulan side of the neutral zone, they're out there, there's probably lots of supposedly real world Independence Day type situations occurring on the other side of the neutral zone, where the Romulans are building up their empire by conquering places like Remus, I'm sure. So clearly they were busy attacking everybody, attacking and building up their empire, and probably they've built up their strength. So the question is when they have proof of the Earthman's weakness, is there an invasion force getting ready to come pouring across the neutral zone? Or maybe are they setting a trap? The They pinprick the Federation to see if the Federation's going to attack and come across the border, and maybe they've got a trap set up. Who knows? So we have no real indication of what the plan was or the overall operation, except for those couple hints from the commander. I believe Diane Duane did, I think they called him a series. The series was called Rihansu, and it was more about the Romulans. And remember, her version of the Romulans were a little more, they were a little more on the honorable side, as opposed to the sneaky Romulans that we see, that they evolved into by the next generation. And of course, the Klingons were in the old series were a little more of the sneaky type, and they become the more honorable space warrior pirates or samurai warrior pirates that we see in the next generation. Okay, so moving on. Any questions or anything like that? All right.
Let me take a look real quick.
I'm just throwing that out there since I think, Chris, you can probably look at. I can't see the comments or anything like that. If there's any.
So we get one question: aren't the Gorn supposed to be on the Romulan border? I know that there's also something about the Cardassians supposing to be in the Romulan border.
So, yeah, okay. So so the episode, the arena where they fight the Gorns, that happens, I don't know, 4 or 5 episodes after this one. So that's a little bit later on. In the Starfleet universe, they placed the Gorn hegemony, basically a little bit north of the Romulans. So as we see this map, if this over here is the Federation, we got the Romulans over here. The Gorns would be sort of up here at the top and probably a little more to the right. And that's where the Gorns were located, at least according to the Starfleet universe from that game, Starfleet Battles, that I used to play. And then in the Star Charts book, the Cardassians are actually kind of, I guess the Cardassians would be way over to the left on the other side of the Federation. However, there was an episode in Deep Space Nine where they were looking at a map or a star chart where the Romulans and the Cardassians shared a border. But that was the only time we ever saw that. And so, in as much as the Star Charts book is correct, the Cardassians are on the opposite side of the Federation. So, all right. So,
but wouldn't that mean that the TV episode would have to be like incomplete or wrong or something?
Yeah. Well, hey, tee up debate number 3 for the night. You saw it on the show versus a licensed product that came out later. In the end, they're never going to be 100% consistent. So
yeah, that's true.
But that's just the facts. So at the beginning of the episode, we see a wedding happening, and Enterprise is on its way to, it's patrolling the border. It's on its way to Outpost 2. They're getting ready to start the wedding. Kirk calls down Spock calls down to the chapel just before the wedding begins and says, "Hey, Outpost 3 has gone silent." Kirk very quietly wants to keep the proceedings going on, so he very quietly says, "All right, accelerate to top speed." I think he said accelerate to maximum speed or something. So we all know that would be warp 8, and that would pretty much cut his ETA in half. Whatever his ETA was towards the border just got cut in half by going to top speed, which was warp 8. But again, they didn't say warp 8 at the time. So I don't know to what extent that had been figured out. I guess I'd have to go watch the 13 prior episodes and see what was, do a technical analysis of the first 13 episodes at that point. So the wedding's interrupted when Sulu calls an alert because Outpost 4 has suddenly been attacked. And now the wedding gets interrupted. Everybody splits and runs off to battle stations. Kirk heads up to the bridge. And they have just received word that Captain Hansen has gotten that Outpost 4 has been attacked. So Outpost 4, right over here, is now under attack. So Enterprise probably would be veering off to head towards Outpost 4 at this point, expecting that Outpost 2 and 3 are clearly offline. Now, all I can say is Commander Hansen's job, he probably had at least a small crew. He mentioned the phaser crews were killed and the phasers were destroyed. So each of these little outposts, had some kind of a crew, and it was probably pretty small. I would imagine it was probably a really dull job. Maybe it's where they sent midshipmen to. I don't know. But it was probably a pretty dull job. Because you got to remember, there've been no communications with the Romulans for the last 100 years. So there's no trade. So there's probably no cross-border trade going on. You might have pirates running back and forth or something like that, or other types, but you don't have any probably significant above-board trade that's happening. There's no diplomacy happening. There's been nothing for 100 years. And then all of a sudden, his job gets interesting one day. So Commander Hansen, I think he's probably a veteran of the war with the Klingons 10 years earlier. If he's a commander, he's probably got 15, 16, 18 years in Starfleet. If his career has gone on a similar trajectory as like a Navy career does. So 10 years earlier, he was probably a lieutenant, a junior or senior lieutenant during the war with the Klingons. These outposts, they were set up 100 years ago. So, and I would venture to guess that Starfleet's probably not putting a lot of resources into maintaining these old outposts in a place where they haven't heard from an enemy in a long time. I mean, maybe they have. We really don't truly know. But we know that Starfleet's probably, or we can guess, I think, that Starfleet's probably more worried about the Klingons and exploration and getting the exploration done than they are worried about this border that has been quiet, not a peep for over 100 years. And when Errand of Mercy happens, which is episode 26, so presumably that's a few months after this, Kirk talks about Code 1, which is war. Which is the signal for war that they received, and that the negotiations had broken down. So chances are the negotiations have been going on for quite some time. So the Klingons are probably a bigger threat and a bigger concern. So, there might not even be that many ships patrolling the area. As always, Enterprise is the only ship in the quadrant or the sector, as it usually happens to be. So, that particular thing seems to follow in the Enterprise.
So, I will point out that it makes a lot more sense for that to be true out on the frontier than
what was that?
Than does it Earth.
I'm sorry, what was that?
It makes a lot more sense for them to be the only ship in the sector out on the frontier than it does at Earth.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, they're always parked at Earth, and there's not a ship to be found anywhere.
Yeah, we're the only ship. We're the only ship here in the South Atlantic by Easter Island. Makes a lot more sense than we're the only ship in Norfolk.
Yeah, exactly. To be honest, I wonder if any U.S. Navy captain has ever gotten that message. You're the only. Well, I guess you could be the only ship in the area, considering you can only travel at 30 knots. That's a smaller slice, but
you might be the only ship that can get underway.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and at Pearl Harbor, there was, what was it, the Nevada? At least they got underway, right? So now I don't know what you think about this, Chris, but I kind of believe that there probably is subspace communication and some form of subspace data link between these outposts and probably other Starfleet assets in the area along the border, so that they can share sensor information. We don't really truly know how far out their sensors are, but you do get a sense of. And the other thing I want to point out: the whole time, speed, distance problem. It if you go by the star charts distances here, then Enterprise had to have been much, much closer, because even at warp 8, it's going to take, even at warp 8, which was 512 times the speed of light. So that means it's about 1.5 light years per day. So Enterprise would have had to have been much, much closer than was sort of indicated by that map. Or warp 8 was much faster. So, and that assumes that all the warp speeds are a consistent, move the ships at a consistent rate. So different people would argue that perhaps in different parts of space, ships can move faster at different warp speeds. So I don't know. So anyway, so just understand that even if you buy the star charts, you like the star charts distances and stuff, if you do the time speed distance calculations from the warp speeds, and even if you use the next generation's warp numbers, they're still a little too slow for things to have happened as quickly as they did. But that's what Hollywood does. They accelerate the process to make it a little more interesting. Chances are they got in real life, they probably got the wedding done and it didn't get interrupted. They had plenty of time to sit around. They still had another day before they got to the border at that point. So, let's see. And actually another example of Hollywood accelerating things. Chris, you and I talked about the Sully Sullenberger movie, where it was over a weekend that they had this debate, and then they came to the conclusion that, oh no, he did it right, everything's okay. Whereas I believe that, all those investigations took place over more than a year. So
yeah, those things always take months to do.
So it's always more interesting when you speed the process up. But makes for better storytelling. So anyways, so I believe these outposts were all probably interconnected by subspace data links and all this kind of stuff, and they could probably share some information. There'd of course be some time delay from whatever distance, and based on the speed of the communications. But that's how they would I would imagine that's how they would protect the border. And so the point is, Commander Hansen probably had to know that communications had been lost with Outpost 2 and 3. So it doesn't take a genius to know that, to know that 4 comes after 3 if he thinks somebody's actually making an attack. But he has nothing on his sensors. All right. There's no data links, don't show anything. So, maybe this is a big sensor glitch. Maybe these old computers on these old outposts and these old sensor systems or something just aren't working very well right now. Anyway, and either way, Enterprise is on the way. It's at the point of the wedding, the Enterprise was not very far away. It was minutes away. So basically everything's going to be all right. Enterprise is going to be here, and Hansen can look at the map and go, well, there's nothing on our sensors. There is no Romulan that can make it across the neutral zone before the Enterprise gets here. So, I figure I'm okay. So that's probably the calculation, or possibly the calculation he was making. And probably talking it over with his staff. So as we go through, like I said, Enterprise is close. There's nothing that can make it across the neutral zone before the Enterprise arrives. And then sometime in there, Outpost 8 will drop off the net as well. We have no idea on the exact time frame. We're talking about minutes here at this point, though. But we have no indication of exactly when Outpost 8 drops off. But we know it does because Commander Hansen says, tells Enterprise, Outpost 2, 3, and 8 have been destroyed, or been knocked offline. So I would imagine at this point, they're trying to raise the Enterprise. Okay, they're trying to give the Enterprise a call and maybe see if the Enterprise knows anything that they don't know. And of course, you've got this heavy cruiser racing towards you, so maybe you want to talk to that captain. And suddenly that community, if you can remember back to Star Trek 3, I kind of imagine this, where Captain Esteban says, hey, send this message to Starfleet. And the communication officer plays with this little earpiece and he says, we're being jammed. I don't know. So they probably tried to raise the Enterprise. Their communications are suddenly being jammed by an energy surge. And then suddenly a ship appears. Now, Commander Hansen hasn't seen a Romulan. Nobody's seen a Romulan for 100 years. So is this a Romulan? Is it a first contact? Is it a pirate? Who is this person and how did they get here? And by the way, was it some sort of a sensor glitch that they just appeared? Are their sensors not working? Did they have some form of stealth? Or is their warp drive so fast that they made it, across the neutral zone really quick? And, so who knows? The point is he's got to be a little startled and have some questions running in his mind right now. However, as he looks at this ship, it's got a rounded front. The engine nacelles look very similar to the Enterprise, or very similar to Federation engine nacelles. And I believe in a deleted scene, he speculates that maybe there were spies or something like that. And between the Next Generation, between the Picard episode, we know that the Romulans have infiltrated the Federation at various points in time. And actually, from the Enterprise television series, we also know that Romulans had infiltrated, the Vulcan High Command and stuff like that. So we know that the Federation has to have Romulan spies all over the frickin' place. Because the Romulans had infiltrated and taken over, or essentially been in command of the High Command, the Vulcan High Command. So clearly, I'm willing to bet that there were Romulan spies lurking about. So, go ahead.
There was something I was going to say about that. There was some piece of information on that, and I can't remember what it was. So never mind. All right.
All right. Well, let me know when it comes to you. So, anyways, so at some point in here, the Romulan commander earlier in later on in the episode, he talks about, if basically implies that it's important to study your opponent. So chances are that Romulan, he may very well have paused briefly to get some sensor scans on the outpost. Probably he continued jamming communications just to make sure the guy can't get out anything. That, of course, makes its own noise, but that probably makes its own subspace noise that might be detectable, but at least the guy can't get a coherent message out. Anyways, so at some point in there, then the Romulan, Hansen's probably going to raise his shields, probably do the good Federation thing and make attempts to communicate with with this new ship. And maybe he's even wondering, do you use first contact protocols when you haven't seen an opponent for 100 years? What do you do? So certainly this wasn't on his agenda for the day. So now, then at some point the Romulan would have to have launched his torpedo. So what does Hansen do? Does he fire whatever weapons he has at the Romulan ship? Does he fire at the torpedo in hopes of detonating it or perhaps degrading it? For any Starfleet Battles players out there, you could use your phasers. To degrade the warhead of a plasma torpedo, and so maybe that would, and even Sulu talked about firing phasers to detonate it. In my mind, probably that weapons officer would probably have to tune or calibrate the phasers to a particular frequency or something like that to calibrate them in some way to have an effect on the plasma torpedo.
Let's talk a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about what exactly a plasma torpedo is?
Sure. So, okay. So in raw technical engineering terms, no. In tactical terms, in Starfleet Battles, anyways, the plasma torpedo was a enormous weapon. In Starfleet Battles, a fully charged photon torpedo would cause six. You know, they have numbers and boxes, shield boxes, and stuff like that. So the shields of a Federation heavy cruiser could sustain about 24 points of damage. A single fully charged photon torpedo would do about 16 points of damage. A plasma torpedo, if it hit you at full strength, would do 50. So not only would it take down your shield, it would do a bunch of damage inside your ship, and really mess up your ship. So they were very, very powerful weapons in pretty much all the games. They're very powerful weapons. And the other thing is, but they moved a little bit slower. A ship could run away from it to a point, and to reduce the strength of the warhead, just like what Kirk did, right? He ran away from the torpedo, and then it finally caught up to him and hit him, but it didn't do as much damage because he had run the torpedo out a little bit.
But as I recall, so I have not seen this episode with the reimagined special effects.
Oh, all right.
As I recall, what it basically did was it's firing basically raw plasma that's expanding over time and distance. And so basically Kirk is trying to get far enough away from it so that by the time it's hitting his ship, instead of being a small ball of dense plasma, it's a big ball of a lot less dense plasma.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in Kirk's case, they were just trying to run from it, but he was still shooting off the ship's log buoys and kind of expected to die. I believe he even hugged Yeoman Rand, one last time, standing on the bridge there. So, he put his arms around her, I guess. But
so apparently, he did not do his sapper training.
That's right. He did not do the sapper training. Funny, I did that couple weeks ago. So, anyways, so yeah, I think it's a big expanding ball. And they do talk about in the show, and there was a setting you could do if you were playing the Romulans where you could set it to enveloping, in which case the damage did 100, the warhead at full capacity did 100 points of damage, but it dispersed it around all of your ship shields. So it was a good way to degrade a ship, but or if you could hit it, kill it. So anyways, so we don't know what Hansen did at this point, but whatever choice he made, he didn't quite have enough staying power, and the torpedo hit and it destroyed their shields and their weapon crews. And suddenly Commander Hansen is the only survivor in his command. So he's lost weapons, lost shields, all that kind of stuff. The Romulan cloaks again and probably goes off to recharge its torpedo. In most of the games, it takes quite a while for these torpedoes to recharge. So the jamming would stop, and that's when Kirk makes it up to the bridge, and they make contact with the Enterprise. Hansen's on screen, and he's talking over the issue with Kirk. So of course we see the Outpost 4 get destroyed.
Does Kirk ever try to call? I forget. Does Kirk ever try to call home?
I don't remember exactly. I think he was sending status reports to Starfleet Command.
Because I want to say there was an early episode where where at one point he sends a message off, and basically Uhura tells him it'll take 2 weeks to get to Starfleet Command.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what episode that is.
I think it was a matter of hours, because by the time the battle was over, Enterprise had a response. In this particular episode, when the battle was over, someone comes in as they're chatting in the sickbay or something like that, and they tell Kirk, Starfleet Command's going to endorse, whatever action you decide. Now, some of that could be transmission delay, and some of that could be commanders, admirals scratching their heads, not wanting to make a decision. So,
yeah, it's basically Kirk ends up sending a message back that effectively translates as, "I'm thinking about starting a war. Are you okay with that?"
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah, he basically says, "Yeah, I'm crossing the neutral zone under my responsibility, all that kind of stuff." Of course, after briefing the entire crew that under no circumstances will they cross the neutral zone. The ship is expendable. The crew is expendable. Everybody's expendable. All the outposts are expendable. They may not cross the border. So Kirk, of course, says, "Yeah, I'll cross the border."
Yeah.
So basically, at this point, this is kind of where the battle is on. They suspect that the Romulan ship fires. We see it fire its torpedo at Commander Hansen's outpost number 4. And Spock points out, "Hey, they might not know we're here yet. They cloaked and made a nice leisurely maneuver back towards the Romulan Star Empire." And so Kirk proceeds to follow them. So there's a bit of a cat and mouse game that happens here. And
How
Kirk
exactly is he following them again? I forget.
What was that?
How exactly is he following them again if they're cloaked?
So the cloaking device apparently, I suspect the cloaking device here, they could get a sense of roughly where the ship was. It was enough to be heading in the general direction of the Romulan ship. It wasn't enough to get a good solid targeting solution on the ship.
Okay.
I would imagine it would be like hearing an elephant moving in the brush. That elephant's a little bit north of you, but you're not sure exactly where. So yes, they and perhaps just like a submarine, perhaps like sonar, maybe they had a rough line of bearing on the thing, but no distance information because of the cloak. So they were able to roughly follow the Romulan, but they weren't able to get a good firing solution.
Yeah, and there's an interesting rabbit hole that we should go down sometime.
Okay.
Is exactly what this. I don't think we have enough information to know about exact sensor methodologies. But the one thing we do know is that there are plenty of instances in Star Trek where the sensors are clearly FTL, which to me says that they're a subspace phenomena of some sort.
Oh yeah, no, I believe wholeheartedly that in Star Trek their sensors are FTL. I mean, I'm not even sure that that's too much up for debate.
Well, I mean, at least some of the sensors are FTL.
Right. Some
of them, like they talk about optical telescopes, etc.
Oh, of course.
But okay, so you've got sensors that are FTL. They seem to be active sensors. Mm-hmm. When you sort of add all that stuff in, it's like, okay, I know how radiation of various types propagates through space. It's relatively straightforward through space. Just like radar is, more or less is relatively straightforward through an atmosphere. It's actually not, but compared to sonar and compared to sound in water, radar in air is just pristine and nice and clean and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. So it makes me wonder, if the right analogy for sensors is it sound in water or is it radar?
I suspect it's not super clean. But yeah, I don't know. But you're right. That's a whole separate rabbit hole that would certainly be relevant to this because, or many of the other tactical stuff. And, since detecting and targeting is a big deal.
Might be when it comes to subspace stuff, it's really a signal to noise ratio thing. Because mm-hmm. That's one of the things that people don't understand about stealth. Stealth doesn't make you invisible. What it does is it decreases the signal so that you get lost in the noise. Yeah. And for a lot of wavelengths, it forces the defending radar to make a choice, the radar operators to make a choice between swamping their system with false alarms or, keeping the false alarm rate low and also throwing out the real data when they
Yeah.
filtering out the actual signal as well as the noise.
Yep.
So
Yes, indeed. So never in my wildest dreams would I have believed that I have been speaking for 55 minutes, or we're 55 minutes in right now. So I may speed up just a little bit here.
it's okay with me. So
Okay. So now we have our cat and mouse game. Kirk is following and shadowing the Romulan ship, and to the point where the Romulans, of course, believe that they're being shadowed by, or that there's a sensor.
for the cat and mouse game, I've got a prop.
So the Enterprise seems to be faster. The Romulan ship has a cloaking device with a big torpedo. Takes it a long time, and it uses a lot of power to arm it. And they get in there. So Enterprise is simply following and shadowing. The Romulan crew members think, oh, it's just a sensor echo. This is no big deal. So this must be one of the subspace phenomena that happen, because the Enterprise isn't advancing or falling back or anything like that. So it moves as they move. And in the meantime, Kirk decides to have a good briefing. And this is where they kind of discuss the tactical information. Spock they had passed close enough to Outpost 2 or 3 to beam over some of the remnants in the rubble, and Spock shows that this really powerful weapon. Scotty says they've got just pure impulse, so they're much slower. Now, there's no way to fight an interstellar war over any reasonable amount of time without having warp in this universe in the way they do it. So somewhere along the way, Enterprise's sensors probably, this is my retcon, of course, they weren't picking up the power source of that Romulan ship. Let's see here. But during the briefing, it's the big dilemma: do they fight or not? And basically, they come to the conclusion that they need to fight to prevent a war. Stiles brings this up, talks about a lot of the history, and Spock agrees because, of course, they had tapped into the communication or the transmission from the Romulan ship, and they got a shot of the bridge of the Romulan ship, and so they know that Romulans look like Vulcans. Which Stiles, of course, is the kind of our bigoted guy who doesn't like Vulcans or at least doesn't like Spock now because he might be a Romulan.
Which is interesting if you think about it, because Roddenberry, this is not the same Roddenberry of later episodes. Mm-hmm. And Next Gen, where he had the problem with the episode Family because Picard and his brother have arguments, and he believed that humans won't have arguments with their siblings anymore,
right?
And he was always the idea that there would be a Federation crew, a Starfleet officer who would have a problem with Spock because of this is not consistent with some of the other things that he said. Then again, neither is anything that happened on Galileo 7.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, they clearly argued with each other plenty. And, McCoy might get labeled for, harassment of some sort at some point along the way. So
just cranky. Cranky's okay in the 23rd century.
Yeah, cranky's okay. But he made more than he made more than one of what would today probably be considered a racist comment about Spock's ears and stuff like that. So, but one of the things they come to the conclusion of in the during this meeting is that there's a comet out there that's flying through this system, and the Romulan happened to be headed right for it. And I thought it was interesting that each ship captain decided that they could use the comet for their own purposes. The Romulan, once he got deep enough into the comet, the comet would obscure, he had reasoned that the comet would obscure the sensors of the Enterprise. Not that he knew it was called the Enterprise, of course, but of his pursuer, because he believed he was being pursued by a Federation ship, because the Romulans also detected the signal to a Federation ship. And Kirk, sees the Romulan headed for it, and he's thinking, oh, well, an invisible ship will know exactly where it is. It'll displace particles, and we'll be able to hit it. And all right, game over. So I've got my plan. And so they each had their very own. Plan. So Kirk, as the Romulan starts going in, Kirk veers off and goes around the other side of the comet so he can catch the Romulan as it's visible and coming out the other side. And the Romulan, of course, is planning to use the comet once he gets deep enough in there and obscure it enough to turn on the Enterprise. So one of the Romulan subordinates reports that the Enterprise is gone and isn't there anymore. So the Romulan guesses Kirk's plan, guesses that Kirk is coming around. He takes evasive maneuvers. The Enterprise, waiting on the other side coming out of the other side of the comet, doesn't see the Romulan where he should be. And then Kirk realizes what happened, and he decides, yep, I guess that bad. It's, this person's, that Romulan commander's smarter than I thought. He fires blindly and veers off. And unfortunately, the Romulan, unfortunately for the Romulan, he scores some lucky hits on the Romulan ship and, does some damage to the Romulan ship. So in the meantime, the Romulan centurion, the friend of the old companion of the Romulan commander, he dies in the attack. There's a little bit of a chase ensues, and the Enterprise has fired some weapons, and he decides to jettison. And there's an old submarine trick from World War II, where you would put in debris and clothing and bodies and all that stuff and jettison it out the torpedo tubes, and it would rise to the surface, and the destroyer captains would look at that and go, oh, we killed them. Look, there's some debris and stuff like that. And that was an old trick. And so the Romulan commander does the exact same thing, but he includes a nuclear weapon in that. And in Starfleet battles terms, those were called nuclear space mines that old Romulan ships had on board.
And this is pretty much the same way that John Sheridan bagged a Minbari cruiser.
That's true too. Yep, that's exactly right. So it doesn't work every time in science fiction, but every now and then. Well, it doesn't work for the bad guys. Actually, no, this actually worked. I mean, he damaged the Enterprise in this particular case.
Yeah.
So the Romulan damaged is trying to get away. Enterprise is pursuing. And they score another hit. A bunch of debris comes out. The Enterprise is passing. Spock detects a metal-cased object, and Kirk, orders an evasive maneuver, fires phasers point blank, hoping to detonate the device. And the device, the nuke goes off, and it damages the Enterprise. But Kirk decides to play dead and this would become a Kirk classic. And one thing I want to point out, Captain Kirk was not the legendary Captain Kirk yet. He has not, in canon at least, he had not fought a space battle as captain of the Enterprise yet. So this is his first time at bat. Whereas our Romulan commander, has seen 100 campaigns. So he's definitely a tired, weary old warrior.
Does make you wonder who they were fighting.
What's that?
Does make you wonder who they were fighting.
Yeah. Yes, it does. It definitely does. So a damaged Enterprise, Kirk plays dead, and now the giant waiting game ensues. The Romulan has, the Enterprise has lost the Romulans, and now it's a waiting game. And I think they were, in Captain's log, they were sitting around for 18 hours or something like that. There's a scene down there where Kirk's in his quarters, and he's sitting around wondering, why me? Because again, it's my first space battle, and suddenly, he's got to make decisions of basically war or peace for the Federation at this point. And it's a case where he kind of has to go against Federation ideals in order to prevent a war. So it's definitely a little bit of a problem for him. Anyways, Kirk goes up to the Enterprise, or I'm sorry, Kirk goes back up to the bridge. They're sitting around waiting, and then Spock's working on some stuff, and he accidentally sends off a signal, activates something which sends off an electronic signal that the Romulans detect. Kirk decides, okay, well, and of course, Styles is looking over at Spock like, you frickin' traitor, you just killed us. And Kirk handles it okay, decides to take it as an opportunity. Assuming that the Romulan commander is now going to come in for the kill, Kirk backs up the Enterprise or maneuvers the Enterprise away. And then Decius sees the signal, and he, of course, wants to make the attack. The Romulan commander doesn't trust this sorcerer of a captain he's fighting and wants to just leave it be and go home. But the Decius, the well-connected, probably little, well-connected guy on the ship, insists on doing it. So he decides to go ahead and make the final attack, and Kirk backs up, anticipating the Romulans' move, orders fires the phasers and stuff. And of course, the phasers burn out at this particular point. And then we have the dramatic scene where Spock runs in and hits the firing button. And thankfully, they were able to shoot and take out, further damage the Romulan ship before they were able to get into plasma torpedo range and damage and hit the Enterprise. And of course, we have the Spock rescue Styles. Tomlinson dies in the phaser room, and Kirk communicates with the Romulan ship. They have a little discussion. Maybe we could have been friends in another life. Kirk offers to beam over his crew, and he says, "Nope, not our way." And he pulls the handle on apparently another nuclear mine, and detonates the Romulan ship, and that ends the battle.
One of the things that I now think is actually kind of weird about that episode is that they had a phaser room set that they never used again.
That's a good point. You're right. Yeah.
Which is weird. They must have redressed it into something else or taken it down because they needed the space.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I suspect they had some all-purpose things that got reset, for depending on whatever episode they were doing. But yeah, from that technical standpoint,
the dilithium crystals.
What's that?
Remember the room where they keep the dilithium crystals?
Engineering?
Well, no, but there was the place that had sort of like there were 3 panels on the wall and they sort of opened out. Mm-hmm. They looked like laundry chutes.
Right.
I wouldn't surprise me that if you didn't look at those 2 sets very carefully, you'd realize that they were the same set.
So, all right. So I'm close to wrapping this up. We've got the bulk of it done, but advantages: the Enterprise was faster. However, their phasers proved fairly unreliable under the stress of combat because they kind of kept burning out on them and stuff. Even resulted in the death of a phaser crew or a phaser crewman. So yeah, like I said, the captain of the Enterprise, this is his first space battle as captain. And then of course the strategic implications of the decision he made, he wasn't just out chasing some pirate or something. This was going to determine war or peace for the Federation. For the Romulan captain, he was very experienced, been through hundreds of campaigns. He had the cloaking device, which made it hard for any weapons to do damage to him. But it had a high power drain, and he had a very powerful plasma torpedo, which also apparently took a long time to arm and used up a lot of power. both of the captains took time to analyze the actions of the other. So they were kind of following the idea, fight the man, not the machine. Both made use of the terrain in space, such as the comet. Both captains used deception. The Romulan used the nuclear space mine and, throwing out debris. Kirk played dead. And this, of course, was one of Kirk's classic tactics, used multiple times. And then Kirk used his greater maneuverability to take many long-range, low probability of hit pot shots at the ship and just picked away at it from a safe distance. And you can do that if you are faster and more maneuverable than the opponent, even if the opponent has a higher, a more powerful weapon. So if I'm riding around on a horse and I have a bow and arrow, and you've got this really powerful club that one hit will knock the horse out and kill me, I can just stay out of range, which is what Kirk did. So the strategic impact of the battle, the Romulans stayed on their side of the neutral zone. Starfleet knew that they needed intel on this cloaking device because this is the first they'd heard of it, as far as we know. They needed to know how it worked. And a couple years later, this encounter was most likely the reason Kirk was chosen to steal a cloaking device in the Enterprise incident a couple years later. So probably, I suspect Starfleet was spending Starfleet intelligence was probably spending a couple years trying to develop some form of plan to set up some situation where they could steal a cloaking device.
Yeah, and to juxtapose that with, I just watched an episode of the first season of the Orville the other day, the one where they salvage an enemy shuttle and they decide to send it off to get a copy of the Krill's holy book, so that their PSYOPs people can read the holy book and try to figure out what's going on. And they literally just sort of said, we're going to pick you and you to do this. Mm-hmm. And, picking Seth MacFarlane's character, picking Ed Mercer is actually not that bad a choice. I would have preferred them to spend 6 months planning the mission. But instead, they pick Ed Mercer's character, who's really, Seth MacFarlane's character is really not a bad choice. Scott Grimes's character is a horrible choice. Mm-hmm. The last person I'd want to send on that mission.
Yeah. Well, and, and I don't know this with absolute certainty, but I would imagine Special Forces guys, any kind of mission that they're doing, they're probably, creating mock-ups of the area they're in a perfect world, and research or rehearsing said mission over and over again. So you don't just throw some random person into it like they do in Star Trek, but what the heck?
Yeah. In fact, I can say that I know for a fact that there's when as a general rule, the approach on things like that is you do threat assessments on exactly what you're going to run into, and where the reactions could be, et cetera, et cetera. There's the mission planning side of that is quite extensive.
Yeah. Yeah. What enemies in the area? If I do this particular action, how might they react? Then what does my reaction have to be? What is their reaction? You gotta war game it out, really. So
yeah, there's a lot of truth to that. You really do.
So well, it is about 10:15, so we are clearly above and beyond our time.
Yes, and so one of the things we didn't talk about that we did talk about in the prequel to the show before we went live is I mentioned the fact that I am wearing my Swiftsure shirt, which is a shirt that was there's only one of these on planet Earth, and it's because it was the shirt that I got as being part of a 200th anniversary of Trafalgar War Game, where we had literally like 70 people playing a board game, which was an absolute blast. And so at some point we should have and that led Alec to talk about a big game he was in. So we should start off talking about gaming next time.
Sure. That
and I'll
sounds
tell
good.
the story about the 70 player war game where literally I was at the tail end of the French line. I literally did not fire for 6 hours.
Yeah, you do a large game like that, there's a lot of sit around time. It's just no way around that.
But it was a blast because I got to sit next to a really interesting person, somebody that I knew but didn't know particularly well. And by the time I was done, I did know him particularly well. So
cool. So I don't know. Do we have Lissa? Do we have Alec? How do we?
we have Lissa. Lissa is posting.
All right, sounds good.
So I guess we don't have Alec, and I guess we're done.
All right.
So I don't see any questions, etc., except for I got asked if I'm enjoying the Orville. I'm enjoying it tremendously. So I really think the Orville, the way I would describe the Orville, and this is actually kind of important. I love Next Generation, right? But to quote Winchell Chung, the people on Star Trek only look like they're human. And Next Gen is probably the best example of that. I mean, there's the only time anybody ever seems to have a sense of humor is when it's an episode about Data not having a sense of humor. Right.
Right.
And so, it's not that people don't smile and they're not friendly, etc., but that's a show that takes itself really seriously. And everybody on that show, everybody in Starfleet is an A-list performer. Like, Pat, can you think of any Star Trek character, any Starfleet character that you wouldn't kill to have as a member of your command? Right.
The only one they have is Barclay. He's the only person that has troubles, but it turns out he turns into a superhuman eventually anyways.
Well, and and the Barclay's problem is that he's too smart for Starfleet. I mean, it's not like he's a bad performer.
Right.
It's that he just doesn't mesh well. He's a gear that doesn't quite mesh well. But the thing about the Orville is the Star Trek. It's like Star Trek, except it's like Starfleet, except all the people are actually from planet Earth, even the ones who aren't from planet Earth.
Yeah, right. You have those awkward moments, and everybody says dumb things now and then because that's what people do.
Well, yeah, and you'd expect that, like, if you discovered, I mean, you're in the Navy, Pat. If you're on a ship and you discovered that one of your crewmen can literally eat anything, what are you going to do? You're going to start shoving stuff and say, "Here, take a bite out of this plate." So a friend of mine, a former coworker who's a retired naval officer, that he made that observation to me, and it's just like, yep, that's perfect. It's like Starfleet, except it's with actual human beings in it.
With actual humans, yeah. It feels like in by Deep Space Nine. I mean, Sisko seemed like a person with real faults and stuff like that. He was actually actually a dad and everything. So actually had a family. Wasn't just in love with whatever craft or vessel he was on.
Yes. So let's see. Somebody did ask a question. Matthew Bracey asked a question. I will answer it when I go through the chat log and put a response in, because I think we're beyond our time, and we should be respectful of Lissa's schedule, and we'll let her go. But I will answer it in the chat. I always try to go through in the next day or so and go through all the chat and sort of clean up loose ends and stuff like that. So I'll attempt to do that. I'm also, for what it's worth, I'm doing a science fiction convention called Capclave this weekend, and I've got a panel tomorrow that is at 10:30 where I'm talking with John Henry and Tom Doyle and Alan Smale, all science fiction authors, about mistakes how to work military mistakes into fiction and things like that, and also about things that people get wrong. What was that, Pat?
What time is that?
That's at 10:30. So if you look up Capclave, it is something that you have to register for. So in order to see it, but as far as I know, they still have registrations available, and you can register for it. So, anybody's interested. Capclave is a great con. I really regret the fact they couldn't do it in person this year, but they're doing a great job doing it online.
Nice.
So, all right, everybody. I think that's it.
All right.
So
Take care, everyone. See you later.